Hello, this is Demetria Miles-McDonald, founder and CEO of Decide Diversity and the creator of the Table of Diversity. A question that I get often that I'm going to answer today is, has the Table of Diversity had any changes or updates since being created in 2015? The answer is yes. The Table of Diversity has undergone so many updates and changes since I originally created it. My goal has always been to update the Table of Diversity every 2 years. So to really have, a pulse on what's happening in the DEI world, how do people refer to themselves? How do they refer to others? And are there new aspects of identity that are coming up that need to be on the Table of Diversity? So there are sometimes, columns that come off of the Table of Diversity and some that come on. One that I can think about is personality. That hasn't always been on the Table of Diversity. That was an addition that we had over the years because, most organizations, a lot of them have their people take personality assessments. And personality is a huge factor in determining how people show up and whether they're allowed to show up in their full selves. And so that has been a very welcoming addition to the Table of Diversity. One thing that has come off of the Table of Diversity is, I believe it was immigration status or something along those lines. I believe it was national origin. But I always get questions about immigration status, and I had considered putting immigration status on there, but I had national origin on the Table of Diversity, and that caused a lot of conversations. And I learned a lot, and I eventually ended up talking to an immigration lawyer, and they were like, I see where you're going. I see the types of conversations that you want to have, but this could bring up some unintended consequences where people are sharing whether or not, they have the documentation to be here, they've gone through the process of becoming legalized citizens and all of that. And if someone has not, they could face deportation. And I was like, whoa, like, say less. That's not what I'm trying to uncover as part of this process, even though I do think that immigration is a very important issue that is a part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation. It's just, I wanted to ensure that if this tool was going to be in the hands of people across the world, that they were also equipped to have that type of conversation in a way that was productive. And I did not have the supporting resources to make sure that that happened. And so that's an example of something that came off of the Table of Diversity. So yes, over the years, the Table of Diversity has undergone so many changes. And sometimes the changes are like, that's interesting. Like I could see this being part of the conversation. Like the 2023 version, we added AI because artificial intelligence is becoming part of the workforce. There are so many organizations that have, for better or for worse, replaced people with artificial intelligence and are either seeing their products and services, spread, or they are seeing a decline and they're bringing people back. But really the goal there was to ensure that if it's not on your radar, it needs to be. Upcoming editions of the Table of Diversity, sometimes I add things on there and I'm like, why wasn't this on there from the beginning? Like, why did I not have this on the Table of Diversity? And I'm kicking myself for it, but at the same time, I'm like, I guess it's better late than never. And sometimes the feedback comes from people. I go out and I do keynote presentations, I do workshops, I'm consulting with clients, and folks are like, hey, have you considered putting this on the Table of Diversity? Or where's this? Or how do I talk about this? And I'm like, mind blown. Like, of course that should be on the Table of Diversity. And so I'm constantly relying on the research that is still unfolding day in and day out. I'm still looking to the special interest groups and to the US Census and other official documents. But sometimes it's just talking to people and saying, hey, what's missing? What part of you is not on here that is so important to how you show up that we can't have a conversation about diversity without talking about it. And that has oftentimes brought things to the table of diversity that, because I don't experience it and because it's not popular in research, I've missed. And so that's always been exciting to hear that. And then there are, like I said, there's new things that are coming up all the time that, while it's great for it to be on the table of diversity, there might not be a whole lot of data to support it. So for example, I always get folks who talk about body size and that there should be a column for that on the table of diversity. And I'm like, that it makes sense. You know, folks are experiencing discrimination, marginalization, and maybe even privilege based on the way that they look, their body size. And I'm like, that would, yes, it should go on the table of diversity, but think about the data behind that. You know, there's not a whole lot of research on body size in the workplace having an impact on business outcomes, having an impact on so many different things. There's just not a whole lot of research there. When you think about the data that organizations collect, they're not collecting information on body size. You know, that's just not a part of the conversation. And so there's always that fine line of what goes on the table of diversity and is there data to back it up so that, you know, there's science behind the table of diversity, and what needs to be on the table of diversity to continue to push conversation. And the body size just doesn't have enough teeth behind it to have a place on the table of diversity. So how do we compensate for that? How do we continue to have conversations about things like body size, skin tone, you know, things like that we know for a fact do have an impact on privilege and marginalization. Within each element on the table of diversity, there are various layers and dimensions, right? So if we think about the woman diversity element, there are so many different things that can make up what determines to be a woman, right? Your hair length, if you have short hair versus long hair, you know, that could be something that folks run with and they're like, oh, you're not a woman unless you have long hair. Is your hair straight? Does it have that beach wave? Is it coily? Is it curly? Is it kinky? Like all of those things define what makes a woman and what privileges and marginalizations come along with that. So all of that is a part of the conversation. And I often, when I'm doing presentations on the table of diversity or intersectionality, I'll make that point that within each of these elements on the table of diversity, there's layers of privilege and marginalization that exist. And that's another way for us to dig in to identity, to dig into diversity, to better understand, are we talking about this in a way that is holistic? Are we incorporating these various aspects into the way that we are creating products, creating services, meeting the needs of our community? And that's where the nuance of diversity comes in. Like, that's why so many times when, you know, folks are talking about their bias, they're talking about stereotypes, they just don't make sense, because from a logical perspective, they just don't make sense. Because once you're digging into diversity, once you're looking at it from an intersectional perspective, once you're considering all of these different things, it doesn't add up anymore. And so once you go through this process of learning, really expanding what you know about diversity to consider intersectionality, the layers, the dimensions that are present within each one of these diversity elements, you can't help but to consider the nuance of this conversation. And translating that into operations is just taking what you're doing to the next level. So yes, the table of diversity undergoes changes every 2 years, although that is probably not enough. But if I did not give myself that time frame, I would spend every waking moment working on the table of diversity. And there would be so many versions of the table of diversity out there that you just wouldn't know which one was the latest version. So I limit it to every 2 years to work on the table of diversity. And I keep a running list of all the changes that have been proposed to me, that I want to make, that I need to make, that I'm excited to make. So that, again, the table of diversity is a tool that reflects our reality, but also pushes the conversation forward in a way so that we can be even more inclusive and more equitable. So if you want your own copy of the table of diversity, go to tableofdiversity.com. It's completely free to get your copy of the table of diversity, and then come back here, meet me here, so that we can continue talking about all the different aspects of the table of diversity. I can give you some behind the scenes information so that you can use this tool in a way that is sustainable, that's effective, and that brings more people in. Again, my name is Demetria Miles-McDonald. I'm the founder and CEO of Decide Diversity and the creator of the Table of Diversity. Thanks again for joining me. See you soon. Bye.